Forget the muskets and the famous portraits. Forget the cherry tree and the declarations etched in sunlight. The true American Revolution was fought in the shadows, a conflict of whispers, invisible ink, and double lives, where the price of a wrong word was the rope. This is the story of that unseen war, an unnerving, astonishing chronicle of ordinary Americans, men and women, enslaved and free, loyalist and patriot, who became clandestine operatives in a struggle so profound it tore apart families, redefined honor, and ultimately birthed a nation forged in secrets. On a biting February night in 1776, not in the gilded halls of Philadelphia, but in a damp, smoke-filled New York tavern named the Blue Anchor, the fate of the fledgling republic was being decided by a runaway apprentice, a wealthy loyalist merchant's wife, and a cipher book bound in plain brown leather. Their names are not in the foundational histories, but their actions secured the vital intelligence that kept George Washington's army from total collapse. Prepare to meet the real architects of American liberty, the spy masters, the couriers, the counterfeiters, and the informants who risked everything when no one was watching. The city was a tinderbox disguised as a respectable port. The air, perpetually thick with the smells of salt, roasting meats, and human waste, was now heavy with a distinct, unsettling tension. New York, unlike its fiery neighbor Boston, was a city deeply divided, a nest of commerce where loyalty was often as fluid as the tides of the Hudson. Merchants still yearned for the return of British trade ships. Farmers clung to the certainty of the Crown's land titles, and thousands of citizens, known as Loyalists, actively prayed for the defeat of the Continental Congress. This division was the very reason General George Washington, newly arrived to command the defenses, felt a knot of dread tighten in his gut. His army, a patchwork of eager but untrained farmers and artisans, had barely managed to chase the British out of Boston. Here, in Manhattan, the real war, the messy, intimate one, was about to begin. Elias Finch, 19 years old, with hands permanently stained by printer's ink and a perpetually wary look in his eyes, was an unlikely soldier in this brewing conflict. His fight wasn't on the parade ground, it was in the back rooms of shops and the dark corners of taverns. Elias was one of the invisible. He had been apprenticed to James Rivington, the city's preeminent Tory printer, until the Sons of Liberty, a radical patriot faction, had smashed Rivington's presses and melted his type into musket balls. Out of a job, and when a keen understanding of how information flowed through the city, Elias had found new work, gathering secrets for Major Benjamin Tallmadge, Washington's chief of intelligence. On that cold February evening, Elias sat nursing a lukewarm ale at the Blue Anchor, his eyes constantly scanning the room. The tavern was a crucible of divided New York, British officers on shore leave, boisterous red-coated loyalists, and subdued, sharp-eyed patriots. Elias was waiting for a ghost. The ghost was not a man, but a designation, 722. This was a new source, a woman who operated in the highest loyalist circles, reporting to a man only Tallmadge knew. Elias's job was simple: receive a package, ask no questions, and deliver it to a dead drop in the ruins of a burned-out bakery near the docks. A commotion drew his attention to the entryway. A woman entered, cloaked in expensive dark velvet, her face mostly obscured by a deep hood, but the glint of a silver locket betrayed her status. She was accompanied by a stout man in a lace-trimmed coat, undoubtedly a wealthy loyalist. She moved with an easy grace that suggested generations of privilege, yet her eyes, when she briefly lifted her head, were filled with a startling, almost desperate intensity. Elias recognized her immediately from a distant sighting Talmadge had arranged, Mrs. Helena Van Dorn. Her husband, a Crown-appointed customs official, was one of the most vociferous critics of the rebellion. She was the absolute last person anyone would suspect of treason. The loyalist led her to a private booth. As they settled, the man spoke loudly, his voice thick with port wine, about an upcoming shipment of cannon from England meant to secure the city. The good General Howe, he boasted, is bringing enough iron to melt every rebel printing press from here to Massachusetts. Elias pretended to watch a game of dice, his heart hammering an irregular beat against his ribs. He noticed a subtle, practiced move. As Helena adjusted her cloak, her hand slipped beneath the edge of the table. A tiny, tightly rolled parchment secured with a smear of yellow wax appeared at the edge of the booth's bench. It was almost invisible. Elias waited for 5 agonizing minutes, letting the tavern noise cover his movement. Then he deliberately dropped a copper coin near the booth. He bent to retrieve the coin, his hand brushing the wax-sealed scroll. In a movement refined by months of practice, he palmed the scroll, leaving the coin where it lay. He straightened up, his demeanor utterly unchanged, and walked slowly toward the back exit. As he reached the door, he heard the loud, unmistakable voice of Mrs. Van Dorn addressing her companion. "Truly, Mr. Hawthorne, that is an exorbitant price for indigo. The Crown should never permit such gouging." It was a distraction, a brief, high-pitched argument about commerce, just enough to draw any casual attention away from the departing apprentice. It was a gesture of solidarity, a tiny, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that she knew he had succeeded. Elias felt a sudden, profound respect for the velvet-cloaked traitor. Her danger was infinitely greater than his own. Outside, the freezing air hit him. The package was warm in his hand, a cylinder of potential death or salvation. He walked through the dark, winding streets toward the burnt-out bakery. The true war, Elias knew, was not about grand gestures and inspiring speeches. It was about this, a quick hand, a coded whisper, and the cold, terrifying certainty that one wrong move meant hanging. The next morning, Elias reported to the headquarters of Major Talmadge, a makeshift office in a converted warehouse overlooking the East River. Talmadge, a former lawyer with an unusually calm and piercing gaze, was the brain of Washington's intelligence operation, soon to be known as the Culper Spy Ring. "The packet, Elias," Talmadge requested, his voice low and devoid of emotion. Elias produced the small, waxy scroll. Talmadge unrolled it and smoothed the stiff parchment with practiced ease. The message was not in plain English, nor was it in the simple substitution cipher Elias had learned. It was a dense block of 3-digit numbers, written in an elegant, feminine script. Talmadge pulled out a small, worn book, the brown leather-bound cipher Elias had heard whispered about. It was no larger than a prayer book. Inside, the pages were filled not with prayers, but with a meticulously hand-copied dictionary. "This is the key," Talmadge murmured, his fingers tracing the columns of words and corresponding numbers. A gift from a friend in France, based on a private code used by a Parisian salon. Our source, bless her treacherous soul, calls it the language of the invisible. It contains nearly 900 words and names vital to our work. Talmadge began to decode, working quickly, his lips occasionally forming the words. 722 reports 345 how, plans to 601 sail with 477 reinforcements of 530 Hessians and 899 heavy cannon by 48 March 20th. Target is 591 New York. They will approach via 114 Staten Island. The 188 Governor has stockpiled 32 barrels of 415 gunpowder in the 201 Customs House. Urgent. 722 also reports a bounty offered by the 188 for the capture of a key 780 Patriot agent, a printer's apprentice named E. Finch. The Talmadge's head snapped up, his gaze locking onto Elias. The room, which had seemed cold, suddenly felt suffocatingly hot. E. Finch? Talmadge repeated, the name hanging like an accusation. Elias, she passed a warning. The enemy knows about you. Elias swallowed hard, the taste of stale ale turning to bile. He hadn't just been a courier. He had been a recognizable face, and immediate risk to be eliminated. His cover was blown. The coin he had dropped, the argument about indigo, they weren't just parts of the exchange. They were part of a desperate, fleeting warning from a woman whose own life hung by a thread. Why would she do that? Elias managed to ask, his voice hoarse. The decoded message, his expression grim. In this war, Elias, some of the fiercest allegiances are not to a king or a congress, but to the idea of a future. She is deep in the serpent's coil, and yet she still chooses liberty. Her commitment is absolute. Your escape secures her continued value. The major rose and walked to a map of New York tacked onto the wall. He jabbed a finger at an unassuming point, the narrow pass of the Harlem River. This changes everything, Talmadge declared. The primary threat is the heavy cannon. If Howe lands those guns and secures the Customs House stockpile, he takes New York easily. We must evacuate the gunpowder immediately, and you, Elias, must vanish. Where to, Major? Long Island. Set up a forward base. You will become our new eyes and ears across the Sound. You will train new couriers. You will only use the code name Culper II. From now on, Elias Finch is dead. Within 2 hours, Elias Finch, the printer's apprentice, was on a small, battered fishing sloop, slipping past the British naval patrols. He carried only the clothes on his back, a small bag of dried beef, and a new identity. His mind, however, was still in the Blue Anchor, dominated by the image of a refined lady in velvet, playing the role of a spoiled loyalist wife, a secret patriot whose quiet act of treason had saved his life and potentially the entire American war effort. The real revolution, he realized, was one of constant, unyielding fear masked by everyday appearances. The Long Island Labyrinth. Setauket, Long Island, April 1776. Elias, now operating under the name Abraham Woodhull, a name borrowed from a family friend, found a quiet agricultural town on the northern shore of Long Island, a place called Setauket. It was remote, sleepy, and, crucially, a hotbed of moderate loyalist sentiment. It was the perfect place for a dead man to disappear and build a spy network. His cover was a farmer, a man quietly trying to manage a small plot of land while the war raged around him. The reality was far more complex. Long Island was now under firm British control. To move around, Elias had to pass countless checkpoints manned by redcoats and loyalist militia. His network had to be utterly unseeable. Talmadge, miles away across the Sound in Connecticut, began sending coded instructions. The network needed to operate in a full circle, gather intelligence in New York, encode it in Setauket, ferry it across the Sound, and decode it in Connecticut for Washington. Elias began to recruit. His first successful recruit was not a man of politics, but a tavern keeper, a profession perfectly suited for gathering gossip and watching faces. Caleb Brewster, a rugged whaleboat captain, was the essential link. Caleb was a man of the sea, fiercely independent, who knew every hidden cove and channel of the Long Island Sound. He was the one who risked his life on every crossing, ferrying messages in a hollowed-out oar or secreted in the bilge of his small boat. "You're asking me to dance with the gallows, Abraham," Caleb said one afternoon, scraping barnacles off his sloop on a hidden beach. "If a redcoat catches me with a cipher, it's a short trip to the noose." "If we fail, Caleb," Elias countered, adjusting the brim of his farmer's hat, "everyone dances with the gallows, and your boat is too fast for their clumsy barges." Caleb finally nodded. "All right, but I'll need a better system than waiting for your coded messages. I need a sign that I can see from the water, something that tells me a drop is ready." This necessity led to the invention of one of the most famous and ingenious aspects of the entire American intelligence operation, the signal system. Elias turned to Anna Strong. Anna was a woman of exceptional social standing in Setauket, the wife of a judge, a woman above reproach. She was also a fiercely committed patriot with a mind as sharp as any general's. Anna lived near a small inlet that provided a direct line of sight from the Sound. Her washing line, Elias realized, was the perfect, utterly innocent signal. "Mrs. Strong," Elias explained one evening in her parlor over a cup of tea, "your laundry line will become our semaphore, utterly invisible to the passing patrols, yet clear to Caleb's keen eye on the water." "How will it work?" she asked, her hands perfectly steady as she poured. "A black petticoat is your signal that Caleb should make a crossing, and to tell him where to land, you will hang a number of handkerchiefs, one for Thompson's Cove, 2 for Strong's Neck, 3 for the sheltered beach by the mill. 5 handkerchiefs, and the message is critical." Anna Strong smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "So my domestic duties will become an act of espionage. A most fitting irony, Mr. Woodhull. No redcoat would ever suspect a lady's wash of treason. And so the Culper Ring was born, a secret society of spies named after Elias's initial code name, Culper Jr., a circle of ordinary people bound by invisible silk threads of code and courage. Elias, the runaway apprentice, was now its central node of nervousness. The secret of the shirt cuff. The Culper Ring's operations were immediately put to the test. General Howe's anticipated move was real, but the heavy cannon that Agent 722 had warned about in New York were proving to be a nightmare for Washington. The British were entrenching. Elias needed a constant, reliable source inside Manhattan. He couldn't go back himself. He needed a dedicated agent on the ground. He turned to a quiet, unassuming Quaker named Robert Townsend. Townsend was a merchant, a man with impeccable manners and a business in the city's highest financial and social strata. He had access to every loyalist officer, every wealthy merchant, and every military supply ledger. He agreed to become Culper Sr. The first major piece of intelligence Townsend sent revealed a truly astonishing plot. The British were planning to counterfeit American currency on a massive scale. 600, Townsend. Reports, 204. Counterfeit. Operation set up in 105, Brooklyn. Target, 700. Continental dollar. Intent, 400. Destroy. Faith in 550. Rebel. Government. Elias was stunned. This was an economic weapon, a quiet attack far more devastating than a frontal charge. If the Continental dollar became worthless, the war was over. Washington's army would starve. But how did Townsend get the messages out? The British checkpoints were everywhere. Caleb could only cross the Sound when the weather was right, and the risk was always immediate. The solution, once again, was mundane genius. Abraham Woodhull, Elias, traveled to New York under the guise of buying supplies, risking his life on every trip. He met Townsend in a prearranged location, Townsend's shop, where the Quaker was known for his polite, often dull conversation. The exchange was terrifyingly simple. Townsend would jot down the most critical information, names, dates, troop numbers, in an excruciatingly tiny script on a single piece of silk-thin paper. He would then casually roll the paper up and sew it into the cuff of his shirt near the wrist. When Elias came to the shop, he would engage Townsend in a long, tedious conversation about wool or tobacco prices. While pretending to inspect a bolt of cloth on the counter, he would casually lean close to Townsend, his hand brushing the other man's cuff. A flick of a hidden tiny razor, a moment of diversion, and the message, literally on Townsend's sleeve, was gone. Elias would return to Setauket, where Anna Strong or one of the other ring members would carefully extract the message. It was a tradecraft so simple, so close to the skin, that no one ever suspected. The woman on the gallows hill. The network was becoming a finely tuned machine, but its success was fragile. The American victory at Trenton and Princeton had briefly raised spirits, but the British still held New York City, and Washington was suffering. One day, Caleb Brewster brought Elias not a coded message, but news of an arrest. He said, "They took 722, the customs officer's wife. They dragged her up to Gallows Hill this morning. Charges of high treason. They're making an example of her." Elias felt a cold dread, a profound sense of failure. The woman who had saved his life, the invisible source of their most vital intelligence, was about to pay the ultimate price. He felt a sudden, fierce obligation. He was Culper Jr. because she had been brave. That evening, a risky plan formed in Elias's mind. He wrote a personal, uncoded letter, an act of extreme foolishness, and gave it to Caleb. It was addressed to Major Talmadge, but contained a private message for Agent 722, should Talmadge have any contact with her, however remote. The message read, "Your name will be scrubbed from every record. Your sacrifice will not be for a lost cause. The serpent will be broken. E.F." Caleb returned days later with Talmadge's reply, a note simply stating, "The information saved the gunpowder. The Crown desires a trade. She may yet live." The message was cryptic, but it gave Elias a sliver of hope. The details of Helena Van Dorn's fate, however, were learned only weeks later, and they were astounding than any message on a cuff. Helena was not hanged. The Crown's case against her, based on vague accusations from her husband and circumstantial evidence, was circumstantial, not decisive. While the Loyalists wanted her executed as an example, her powerful family, who were Loyalist but influential, negotiated a terrible compromise: exile. Helena Van Dorn was forced to watch as her home and all her possessions were publicly auctioned off. Her reputation was permanently stained. She was then placed on a ship bound for Nova Scotia, a desolate haven for exiled Loyalists, condemned to a life of poverty and anonymity, in a place where she was seen as a traitor to the king and despised by the local patriots who had also fled there. She never saw her home again, never saw the successful conclusion of the revolution she had helped secure. She had lost everything but her life. Elias, receiving this final piece of information, felt the weight of the war settle on his shoulders. The American Revolution was not just a war of armies and ideals. It was a grinder that took the noblest of lives and spit out shattered remnants. But the gunpowder was safe. The customs house had been emptied hours before the British arrived to secure it. Washington's army lived to fight another day, fueled by the invisible work of a condemned society lady and a dead printer's apprentice. The serpent's coil was tightening, and the cost of freedom was already incalculable. The Gallows and the Grocer. Setauket, summer 1777. The summer heat made the air in Setauket thick and unbearable, but the true heat came from the increasing scrutiny of the British occupying forces. The king's officers, frustrated by their inability to predict Washington's movements, began cracking down on suspected patriot activity. Major John André, a brilliant, charismatic, and ruthlessly efficient officer in the British Intelligence Department, was now frequently visiting the area. He saw the quiet rhythms of Long Island life not as peace, but as a sophisticated camouflage. Elias Finch, the adopted Abraham Woodhull, felt André's presence like a physical pressure. Elias's cover as a struggling farmer was perfect for avoiding suspicion, but it made communication dangerous. He had to travel to New York frequently to meet Townsend, and each journey was a near fatal risk. Robert Townsend, Culper Sr., the Quaker merchant, was thriving. His business connections made him indispensable to the British quartermasters, who were desperate for supplies. Townsend leveraged this trust, even socializing with the very men he sought to betray. His greatest challenge, however, was his own conscience. The Quaker faith fundamentally opposed violence and deceit. Every coded message he stitched into his cuff was a moral agony. One evening, at a dinner hosted by a British colonel, Townsend was seated next to a boisterous officer who spoke casually of the hanging of Nathan Hale the year before. A simple fellow, that Hale, a schoolmaster, not a spy. He was caught trying to sketch our fortifications. Pathetic. Real espionage, sir, is an art. It's invisibility. It's what you don't see that will kill you. Townsend nodded politely, a cool layer of sweat forming beneath his immaculate coat. He looked at his own cuffs, remembering the silk-thin paper tucked inside. The officer's words, "real espionage is invisibility," were a terrifying threat and a confirmation of the ring's genius. The Sugar House Horrors. The intelligence gathered by the ring was not always military. Sometimes it was humanitarian, revealing the dark heart of the occupation. Townsend began sending alarming reports about the conditions in New York's infamous Sugar House prisons. These massive converted molasses refineries held thousands of captured Continental soldiers, including many of Elias's former acquaintances from Boston. The realization hit Elias with sickening force. The British were not just fighting a war. They were engaging in a campaign of attrition designed to break the Continental Army's morale by extinguishing their captured men slowly and agonizingly. The conditions were so horrific that more American soldiers died in British captivity during the war than in combat. Elias passed the decoded message to Major Talmadge, along with a desperate plea. Washington could not attack New York, but the intelligence could be used politically. Talmadge, with Washington's approval, leaked the specifics of the Sugar House horrors to patriot newspapers in Philadelphia and Boston. The stories of men eating rats, of bodies piled like firewood, ignited a fury across the colonies. It became a powerful piece of propaganda, fueling recruitment and hardening patriot resolve. The cost of liberty was not just on the battlefield. It was in the silent suffering of the starving men in the dank converted warehouses of New York. Anna Strong's line and the French gambit. The most critical moment of 1778 arrived when the war went global. France formally recognized American independence and declared war on Britain, promising a fleet under Comte de Rochambeau. The new British strategy, Townsend learned, was to preemptively attack the approaching French fleet with a portion of the British Navy stationed in New York Harbor, leaving the city briefly vulnerable. The intelligence was high stakes, the precise date the British ships would sail, and their intended route. This required an immediate, high-risk drop. Elias rushed back to Setauket, the urgency of the matter overriding his fear. He sought out Anna Strong at her home, ostensibly to discuss a property line dispute. "Mrs. Strong," Elias said, his voice clipped, "the crossing must be tonight. Caleb needs a 5-handkerchief signal for the Mill Beach. The message is vital." Anna, understanding the magnitude of a 5-handkerchief drop, went to her clothesline. She hung her simple black petticoat, indicating a crossing was needed. Then she added 5 handkerchiefs to the line, pegging them down securely. The signal was visible to Caleb Brewster, miles out on the choppy Sound, but it was also visible to the local Loyalist patrol, the Queen's Rangers, who frequently passed her house. The genius of Anna's act was not the hiding, but the visibility. The Rangers saw the mundane laundry, but the signal had a second, hidden lair. Anna didn't use just any handkerchiefs. She used a specific pattern of colors: white, blue, red, white, and blue, a sequence known only to Caleb and Elias, a secondary confirmation of the message's content. That night, Caleb made the treacherous crossing. The intelligence he carried, detailing the British naval movement and the temporary vulnerability of New York, allowed Washington to coordinate his movements with the French fleet, leading to a crucial tactical advantage that shifted the focus of the war to the south. Anna Strong's simple act of hanging her laundry became one of the most brilliant and effective pieces of visual espionage in American history. The Anatomy of a Traitor. West Point, 1780. The war dragged on. The brilliance of the Culper Ring was never more apparent during the unraveling of the most devastating betrayal in American history, the treason of General Benedict Arnold. Arnold, a celebrated and fearless patriot general, was in command of the vital fortress at West Point on the Hudson River. For months, Townsend had been noticing strange activity. Elias felt a cold premonition. The British Major André, the brilliant spy hunter, was involved. Townsend continued to risk his life, focusing solely on the identity of Gustavus. He tracked the boatman, cross-referenced troop movements, and eventually secured a terrifying piece of evidence: Arnold's handwriting on a pass given to a suspected British courier. The final intelligence drop was the most perilous. General Arnold was planning to surrender West Point, the key to the Hudson and the spine of the colonies, to the British for £20,000 and a brigadier general's commission. Caleb Brewster, once again, was the carrier of this earth-shattering news. The intelligence, detailed and irrefutable, reached Washington in time. Major John André, the British spy master who had overseen the entire plot and who had made Elias's life a living hell, was captured in disguise, carrying the documents of Arnold's treason in his boot. Arnold, alerted just hours before his arrest, made a desperate escape to a British warship, forever cementing his name as the quintessential American traitor. André was later hanged as a spy, a fate Elias had narrowly avoided 4 years earlier. The Culper Ring, through the relentless courage of Townsend, had saved Washington's army and prevented a military disaster that would have likely ended the revolution then and there. The capture of André, the elegant British spy hunter, by the efforts of the invisible American network, was a profound, ironic victory for the cause of liberty. The Last Great Service. Yorktown, 1781. The discovery of Arnold's treason gave the Continental Army a crucial psychological victory, but the military struggle continued. The war shifted south, focusing on the Chesapeake Bay. The Culper Ring, though distant, performed its final, perhaps most important service. Townsend intercepted communications revealing Lord Cornwallis's intentions. Cornwallis, pinned down at Yorktown, Virginia, was desperately awaiting a massive naval rescue force from New York. This precise intelligence was immediately sent south. Washington, now operating with the French forces, used the information to calculate his risk. He knew he had a small, critical window of time. Armed with the knowledge that the British relief fleet was delayed, the combined American and French forces accelerated their preparations. When the French fleet arrived, they were able to meet the British naval force before it reached Cornwallis. The subsequent Battle of the Chesapeake, a French naval victory, sealed the fate of the British general. Cornwallis was trapped. There was no escape by sea and no relief by land. The surrender at Yorktown on October 19, 1781, effectively ended the Revolutionary War. It was the result of a vast, complex military campaign, but its success was predicated on a few crucial pieces of intelligence. Information gathered in whispers, sewn into shirt cuffs, and signaled by the handkerchiefs of a dedicated Long Island lady. The last great service. Yorktown, 1781. The discovery of Arnold's treason gave the Continental Army a crucial psychological victory, but the military struggle continued. The war shifted south, focusing on the Chesapeake Bay. The Culper Ring, though distant, performed its final, perhaps most important service. Townsend intercepted communications revealing Lord Cornwallis's intentions. Cornwallis, pinned down at Yorktown, Virginia, was desperately awaiting a massive naval rescue force from New York. This precise intelligence was immediately sent south. Washington, now operating with the French forces, used the information to calculate his risk. He knew he had a small, critical window of time. Armed with the knowledge that the British relief fleet was delayed, the combined American and French forces accelerated their preparations. When the French fleet arrived, they were able to meet the British naval force before it reached Cornwallis. The subsequent Battle of the Chesapeake, a French naval victory, sealed the fate of the British general. Cornwallis was trapped. There was no escape by sea and no relief by land. The surrender at Yorktown on October 19, 1781, effectively ended the Revolutionary War. It was the result of a vast, complex military campaign, but its success was predicated on a few crucial pieces of intelligence. Information gathered in whispers, sewn into shirt cuffs, and signaled by the handkerchiefs of a dedicated Long Island lady.